Have you ever felt truly unseen? Like your efforts, your sacrifices, your very essence were simply overlooked, fading into the background of someone else's spotlight? Kelsey Brandt understood that feeling in the marrow of her bones. At 34, she carried the quiet dignity of someone who had built her life with intention, brick by laborious brick, yet remained perpetually overshadowed. The day the will of her late father, Arthur Brandt, was read, that shadow deepened into a cold, crushing blanket. The ornate conference room of Brandt and Sons Legal seemed to hum with the unspoken judgment of generations as she sat, a solitary figure amidst the hushed anticipation. Her older brother, Marcus, already seated at the head of the polished mahogany table, exuded an air of preordained victory. His smirk, a familiar curve of contempt, cut deeper than any words. He gestured dismissively to an empty chair beside him, an open declaration of her expected absence, her irrelevance. Marcus, with his tailored suit and polished facade, had always been the golden son, the heir apparent, while Kelsey, the quieter, more observant child, had been consigned to the periphery. She had nursed their father through his final, difficult years, had managed his complex medical needs, handled his often frayed temper, all while Marcus was off building his own empire, only ever calling with perfunctory questions about the family's financial health. She hadn't asked for recognition, only perhaps for a flicker of acknowledgement in his eyes. Now, as the elderly lawyer, Mr. Henderson, cleared his throat, adjusting his spectacles, Kelsey braced herself. She knew what was coming. She had lived a lifetime of being second, or worse, last. Her father, a man of profound silences and even profounder secrets, had made his preferences abundantly clear long ago, not through words, but through the weight of his attention, or lack thereof. The air grew thick with expectation, the scent of old paper and dust filling the room. Kelsey's hands, clasped tightly in her lap, were the only things trembling. Her gaze was fixed on a point beyond Marcus, on the framed photograph of their father, a stern, unsmiling face that offered no comfort, no last reprieve from the cold reality about to unfold. She was ready for the sting, but no preparation could truly dull the sharpness of a final, public dismissal. Her heart, a weary drum, beat a slow, measured rhythm against the walls of her chest, preparing for the quiet detonation of a lifetime of unspoken slights. The stage was set, not for a simple inheritance, but for the stark declaration of who truly mattered and who did not. The lawyer's voice, a dry rustle of parchment, began to articulate the clauses, each word a hammer blow against Kelsey's dwindling hope. To my esteemed son, Marcus Brandt, I bequeath the entirety of Brandt Enterprises, its assets, properties, and all associated intellectual properties, in recognition of his unwavering dedication to the family legacy and his shrewd business acumen. Marcus visibly preened, a self-satisfied nod rippling through his expensive suit. His wife, Clarissa, a woman whose smile seemed permanently affixed by a surgeon's needle, beamed beside him, a silent chorus of approval. Clause after clause followed, detailing bequests to various charities, distant relatives, and even long-serving employees, each name spoken with a gravity that seemed to mock Kelsey's growing invisibility. The detailed inventory of properties, bank accounts, and investments poured forth, a cascade of wealth that solidified Marcus's unassailable position. Kelsey listened, her posture rigid, her gaze fixed on the mahogany table, tracing the faint patterns in its polished surface. She wasn't surprised by the exclusion, but the sheer, deliberate precision of it, the absolute void where her name should have been, felt like a public stripping away of her very existence. Not a single heirloom, not a token sum, not even a mention in a footnote. It was as if she had never been a daughter, never part of the family at all. The lawyer paused, taking a sip of water, and Kelsey held her breath, a foolish, desperate part of her still clinging to the possibility of a last-minute inclusion, a surprise clause. A moment of paternal recognition. But Mr. Henderson simply closed the folder, a soft thud echoing in the quiet room. And that concludes the reading of Arthur Brandt's last will and testament. The silence that followed was deafening, a vacuum where Kelsey's name should have been. Marcus leaned back in his chair, a triumphant glint in his eyes. He exchanged a knowing look with Clarissa, a silent conversation of victory. Well, that was comprehensive. Marcus finally drawled, his voice laced with mock sympathy as he glanced at Kelsey. Though I suppose there wasn't much left to divide, was there, Kelsey? The implication hung heavy in the air. She was irrelevant, undeserving, a drain on resources rather than a contributor. Kelsey felt a cold rush of shame, not for herself, but for the man who had been her father, for his final, damning statement. She rose slowly, her movements deliberate, her eyes meeting Marcus's briefly. There was no anger, only a profound, bottomless weariness. She had walked through countless rooms feeling invisible, but this public declaration of her father's ultimate dismissal, felt like a final, definitive erasure. Her presence in that room, now devoid of purpose, felt like a ghost haunting its own funeral. The brisk autumn air outside the law firm did little to cool the fire of indignation that simmered beneath Kelsey's calm exterior. Each gust of wind felt like a whisper of judgment, a reminder of her father's ultimate rejection. She walked aimlessly for a time, the elegant streets of Heidelberg blurring into a monochrome landscape of indifferent faces and towering buildings. Her mind reeled, not from shock, but from the crushing confirmation of a lifetime's pattern. From a young age, Kelsey had understood her place in the Brandt household. Secondary. Marcus was the star, brilliant and ambitious, while she was the quiet observer, the one who saw the cracks in the family's polished facade. She remembered countless evenings spent reading by her father's bedside during his illnesses, fetching his forgotten spectacles, ensuring his favorite tea was brewed just so, while Marcus was out cementing business deals or social connections. She had sacrificed her own burgeoning career aspirations, put on hold dreams of independent travel, to be a constant, stable presence in her father's increasingly solitary world after her mother's passing. It wasn't asked of her explicitly, but the silent expectation, the quiet knowing that she was the one who would be there, had been a heavy mantle she wore without complaint. She had found solace in the simple acts of care, believing that through her unwavering presence, her quiet devotion, her father would eventually see her, truly see her. But the will reading had ripped away that last fragile hope. It was a brutal testament to the fact that her silent sacrifices, her steadfast love, had been utterly meaningless in the grand scheme of his legacy. The weight of his blindness felt heavier than any material loss. She wasn't angry about the money. She was heartbroken by the final, public declaration of her father's perceived indifference, a dismissal echoed by her brother's triumphant sneer. As the afternoon waned, a different kind of resolve began to solidify within her. The countryside home, their father's cherished retreat, was now officially Marcus's property. But it was also where Kelsey had spent countless summers, where memories, both bittersweet and beautiful, were etched into the very fabric of the old house. She hadn't been back since her father's passing, avoiding the raw grief and the looming sense of finality. Now, a quiet voice inside her insisted she go. Not to seek anything, not to fight for a share of what was now Marcus's, but to confront the echoes of her past, to find some closure for herself, independently of her father's will or her brother's contempt. Perhaps, in clearing out the last vestiges of his life, she could finally clear the cluttered spaces within her own heart. The drive out of the city was a blur, the urban sprawl giving way to rolling hills and winding country roads. The image of Marcus's smug face, illuminated by the cold light of the law office, flickered in her mind. She would not let his condescension define her. She would go to the house, not as the scorned daughter, but as Kelsey, a woman determined to find her own peace, to gather the fragmented pieces of her own worth from the debris of a father's final, bewildering silence. The old countryside home stood silhouetted against the bruised evening sky, a silent sentinel in the quiet landscape. Dust motes danced in the slivers of weak sunlight filtering through the grimy windows, revealing decades of neglect. The air inside was heavy and stale, thick with the scent of forgotten memories and disuse. Kelsey stepped into the hushed entryway, her hand brushing against the banister, its once polished wood now dull and splintered. Every creak of the floorboards, every shadow stretching across the peeling wallpaper, whispered tales of a life lived and now abandoned. She wasn't here to dispute ownership. She was here to gather the remnants of a past that had shaped her, even if it had also broken her. The task was immense: to clear out a lifetime of possessions, to sift through the tangible echoes of her father's existence. Marcus had, of course, delegated this unpleasant duty to her, a final act of condescending convenience. But for Kelsey, it wasn't a chore, it was a pilgrimage. She began in the living room, a space once vibrant with laughter and conversation, now shrouded in white dust sheets that made the furniture resemble a collection of silent, mournful ghosts. She meticulously folded linens, boxed old books, and wiped down surfaces, her movements methodical, almost meditative. Each object she touched held a story, a fragment of her father's enigmatic life. Yet, as she moved through the house, a growing emptiness began to settle over her. There was nothing of her here, no personal mementos left for her, no hidden message in the things he surrounded himself with. It was all simply his. The weight of her insignificance, so brutally confirmed at the will reading, pressed down on her again. She paused, her gaze sweeping across the mantelpiece, where a collection of framed photographs stood, coated in a fine layer of dust. Most were of Marcus, at various stages of his life, smiling broadly, often beside their father. Then, her eyes settled on one smaller, older frame, tucked away almost entirely behind a larger, more prominent portrait of Marcus's graduation. It was a faded photograph of herself, perhaps 10 years old, her hair in pigtails, a wide, gap-toothed grin on her face as she sat on her father's shoulders, his rarely seen smile gracing his lips. It was a cherished memory, a fleeting moment of pure, unadulterated joy, one of the few times she felt truly seen, truly loved by him. Reaching out, she carefully picked up the frame, blowing gently at the layer of dust. The picture itself was a fragile piece of her past, a rare beacon of warmth in a landscape of indifference. As her fingers brushed the back of the frame, she felt something unusual, a slight rigidity, a tiny protrusion that didn't belong. Her heart gave a sudden, hopeful lurch. A faint click, almost imperceptible amidst the creaks of the old house, was the only sound as Kelsey's fingers, trembling slightly, dislodged a small, rusted key from its hiding place behind the faded photograph. It was an old-fashioned key, made of dark, heavy metal, its intricate design suggesting it belonged to something more substantial than a simple lockbox. The rust, a fine, reddish powder, stained her fingertips as she held it up to the dim light. It was cold against her palm, yet it radiated an unexpected warmth, a peculiar sense of purpose. Her gaze immediately returned to the photograph, herself, a girl of 10, perched on her father's broad shoulders, his rare, genuine smile illuminating his face as they stood by the old oak tree in the garden. It was a moment etched in her memory, a rare, fleeting glimpse of her father's unreserved joy and her own profound happiness. She remembered that day with vivid clarity, a surprise picnic, just the two of them, a rare escape from the usual formality of their home life. She had cherished that day, and the photograph had always been her secret comfort, a tangible reminder that somewhere beneath his stern exterior, her father had indeed loved her, even if he rarely showed it. But why had he hidden a key behind this particular photo? Why this one, the only one of her among a gallery of Marcus's achievements? A spark, tiny yet persistent, ignited within her. It was a glimmer of hope, a fragile thread connecting her to a man who had seemed so distant, so unfeeling in his final act. Her father was a man of precise habits, meticulous and private. He would not have hidden something so deliberately without reason. This wasn't carelessness, it was intentional. The key felt significant, a silent whisper from the past, challenging the narrative of her total omission. Kelsey turned the key over and over in her hand, its weight a comforting presence. It spoke of secrets, of something concealed, something perhaps meant only for her. Her mind raced, sifting through memories of the house, trying to recall any locked doors, any obscure nooks or crannies that might correspond to such a key. Her father had always been reserved, almost secretive about certain parts of his life, particularly financial matters. He had maintained a meticulous study, a sanctuary he rarely allowed even Marcus to enter. But this key felt older, more primal than anything in his study. Her thoughts drifted to the cellar, a forgotten realm beneath the house, damp and cavernous, filled with dusty bottles of wine and generations of forgotten storage. She remembered her father descending into its depths sometimes, disappearing for long stretches, his silhouette swallowed by the shadows, only to re-emerge hours later, his face unreadable. She had never been allowed to follow. A sense of urgency, a sudden, almost desperate need for answers, surged through her. This key was a riddle, and Kelsey, the quiet observer, had always been good at solving riddles. She felt a profound shift within her, from despair to determination. This wasn't about the will anymore. It was about understanding her father, about unraveling the final, most important secret he had kept. The key in her hand was not merely metal, it was a silent promise, a last, unexpected whisper from a father who had seemed to have nothing left to say to her. The descent into the cellar was like stepping back in time, into a realm forgotten by light and air. The wooden stairs creaked ominously beneath Kelsey's weight, protesting against her intrusion. The air grew colder with each step, thick with the scent of damp earth and aged wood, a stark contrast to the relative warmth of the living quarters above. Cobwebs, thick and glistening, brushed against her face, clinging to her hair like spectral fingers. Her flashlight beam cut through the oppressive darkness, illuminating a cavernous space filled with silent sentinels, dusty shelves laden with forgotten preserves, old trunks overflowing with indistinguishable objects, and a towering wine rack, most of its bottles long since consumed. This was more than just a storage area, it was a repository of the past, a place where time seemed to stand still. Her heart pounded a rhythmic drum against her ribs, a mix of trepidation and anticipation. This key, this place, felt profoundly significant. She scanned the walls, her beam flickering over rough-hewn stone, searching for anything unusual, any door or cabinet that might correspond to the old, rusted key in her hand. Then, tucked away behind a stack of ancient, moldering crates, she saw it. A heavy, metal safe built directly into the stone wall. It was dark, almost indistinguishable from the shadows that clung to it, its surface encrusted with layers of dust and grime, as if it had been undisturbed for decades. The metal glinted faintly in her flashlight's beam, its solid form radiating an aura of impenetrable secrecy. This was no ordinary safe. Its size and the way it was recessed into the wall suggested it was meant to be truly hidden, to protect something of immense value or profound significance. The key in her palm suddenly felt heavier, pulsing with a newfound purpose. As she approached, a wave of cold air seemed to emanate from the safe, a tangible sense of forgotten purpose. She reached out, her fingers tracing the intricate patterns of the lock. It was old, certainly, but robust, designed to withstand the ravages of time and discovery. She inserted the rusted key into the lock, a moment laden with dramatic tension. It fit perfectly, a satisfying click echoing in the vast silence of the cellar. A breath she hadn't realized she was holding escaped her lips. With a grunt of effort, she turned the key, feeling the tumblers shift with a groan of rusted metal. The handle, stiff and resistant, finally gave way under her determined grip. The heavy metal door, resisting at first, then swung open with a slow, mournful creak, revealing a dark, tantalizing void within. The sound reverberated through the silent cellar, a profound declaration of something long hidden now finally revealed. Kelsey peered into the darkness, her flashlight beam cutting through the inky blackness, her heart hammering with a frantic rhythm. What would she find? More dusty relics of a forgotten life? Or the answers that had eluded her for so long? The air within the safe felt different, charged with a profound, unspoken story. The beam of Kelsey's flashlight pierced the dark cavity of the safe, illuminating its contents with a soft, revealing glow. There was no glittering treasure, no stacks of cash or jewels, but something far more valuable to Kelsey. A small, leather-bound ledger, its pages yellowed with age. A sheaf of neatly folded handwritten letters, and, nestled beneath them, a crisp, official-looking document. Her hands, still trembling slightly, reached in, retrieving the items with a reverence usually reserved for sacred artifacts. She opened the ledger first. It wasn't a typical accounting book, but a meticulously kept record of a specific, private fund. The entries were dated years back, stretching over 2 decades, detailing deposits made by Arthur Brandt, consistently and discreetly, into an offshore account. The numbers were substantial, far beyond anything the family lawyer had mentioned in the will, hidden from public record, known only to her father. Then, she opened the first of the handwritten letters, her father's familiar, precise script filling the page. The first letter, dated almost 20 years prior, began, "My dearest Kelsey, if you are reading this, it means you have found what I intended for you to find. I know I have not been the father you deserved, nor the one I wished I could be. My life, my business, my family, they demanded a certain facade, a sternness that often overshadowed the tenderness I felt, especially for you. Marcus, bless his ambition, embodied the legacy I thought I had to build. But you, my daughter, you embodied the humanity I so often neglected." Kelsey's vision blurred as tears welled in her eyes, blurring the words, but she pushed them back, desperate to absorb every syllable. The letters continued, a heartbreaking confession, a poignant explanation of his true intentions. He wrote of his regret for not showing her enough affection, for allowing Marcus's dominance to overshadow her quiet strength. He spoke of his observations, of how she quietly bore the burdens of the family, how she consistently cared for him without seeking praise, how she saw through the superficiality that blinded others. "I saw your quiet resilience, Kelsey. I saw the depth of your character, a depth that Marcus, with all his outward success, could never truly comprehend. This fund, this hidden account, was my attempt to secure your future, to provide you with the freedom and independence you deserved, without the constraints or judgments of the family structure I had created. I knew that in my death, Marcus would take everything he believed was his by right, and that he would undoubtedly overlook you, just as others always had. This was my way of ensuring you would never be truly unseen, never truly without recourse. This is not charity, my daughter. This is your inheritance, earned not through birthright, but through the profound, unwavering kindness of your spirit, a kindness I failed to acknowledge openly, but which I valued above all else." Lastly, Kelsey unfolded the official document. It was a declaration, signed and notarized years ago, naming Kelsey Brandt as the sole beneficiary of the offshore account and its contents, to be accessed upon discovery of the key and the accompanying letters. It was ironclad, legally binding, meticulously prepared to circumvent any challenges from Marcus or the family estate. The numbers detailed were staggering, a fortune carefully amassed over 2 decades, far surpassing any sum Marcus had inherited. It wasn't just money, it was vindication, a posthumous declaration of love and worth from a man she had believed had forgotten her. The silence of the cellar was now filled with the echo of her father's true voice, a voice that finally, irrevocably, told her she was enough, more than enough. The weight of the documents in Kelsey's hands felt monumental, each page a testament to a father's hidden love and a brother's profound oversight. She knew what she had to do, not out of greed, but out of a fierce need for the truth to be known, for her father's true intentions to be honored, and for her own inherent worth to be finally acknowledged. The confrontation was inevitable. She called Mr. Henderson first, her voice calm but resolute, requesting an urgent private meeting with him and Marcus. The lawyer, initially hesitant, agreed, sensing the gravity in her tone. The following morning, the same mahogany table in the same austere conference room. Marcus sat opposite her, an arrogant smile playing on his lips, undoubtedly believing this was some last-ditch, futile plea for sympathy or a minor concession. Mr. Henderson sat between them, his expression one of professional detachment. "Kelsey," Marcus began, his voice dripping with condescension, "I hope this isn't about some belated appeal. The will has been read, the assets allocated, there's nothing more to discuss." Kelsey met his gaze, her eyes holding a new, quiet strength he had never seen before. "On the contrary, Marcus, there is a great deal more to discuss. My father, it seems, had a more comprehensive view of his estate than was presented." She calmly placed the rusted key on the polished table, its ancient metal contrasting sharply with the modern decor. Marcus scoffed. "A key? To what? A forgotten garden shed?" Kelsey ignored him, then deliberately laid out the faded ledger, the bundle of handwritten letters, and finally, the notarized declaration. Her movements were slow, deliberate, each item a silent, irrefutable witness. Marcus's smirk faltered as his eyes fell upon the documents. He picked up one of the letters, his brow furrowing as he scanned his father's familiar handwriting, the words slowly, chillingly, registering in his mind. His face drained of color as he read his father's intimate confession, the stark betrayal of his own assumptions. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice thin, suddenly devoid of its usual bluster. "A forgery? A trick, Mr. Henderson?" His professional detachment crumbling, picked up the notarized declaration, his eyes widening as he read its contents. He cross-referenced the unique account numbers in the ledger, his fingers flying across his calculator. The figures, he quietly murmured, were astronomical, far exceeding the publicly declared estate. "Marcus, Mr. Henderson said, his voice hushed, tinged with a bewildered respect. This is entirely legitimate. And the funds, they are substantial. This account was established outside the conventional estate, with explicit instructions for Kelsey. Your father's intent is undeniable." Marcus stared at Kelsey, his jaw slack, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. The triumphant glint in his eyes had been replaced by a raw, naked shock, then a simmering rage. He hid this? From me? All this time? The realization that he, the golden son, had been so thoroughly, so completely, outmaneuvered by his own father, and by the sister he had always dismissed, was a bitter pill. Kelsey said nothing, allowing the truth to unfold, allowing Marcus to finally see not just the magnitude of the inheritance, but the magnitude of his father's hidden validation, and by extension, her own. The silence in the room was now heavy with the weight of revelation, a quiet thunderclap that shattered years of unspoken assumptions and buried truths. The silence that followed Mr. Henderson's pronouncement was not empty, but thick with the weight of Marcus's unraveling. His face, usually a mask of controlled arrogance, contorted through disbelief, then shame, and finally, a simmering, raw fury. "This is outrageous," he thundered, slamming a hand on the table, rattling the teacups. He wouldn't have, betrayed me like this." His voice cracked, not from genuine hurt, but from the sudden, public dismantling of his carefully curated image. His very identity as the rightful chosen heir was being annihilated by a stack of yellowed papers and a rusted key. Kelsey remained still, her gaze unwavering, allowing him his impotent rage. This wasn't about vengeance, it was about truth. Mr. Henderson, ever the professional, interjected calmly. "Marcus, the documentation is impeccable. Your father, a man of considerable foresight, clearly took extraordinary measures to ensure these funds would pass directly to Kelsey, bypassing any and all claims related to the primary estate." He established this fund for many years, diligently, almost presciently. He pushed the notarized declaration back towards Marcus, a silent challenge. Marcus snatched it up, scanning the signature, the dates, the formal language that left no room for doubt. His eyes darted between the document and Kelsey, a dawning, terrible understanding replacing his anger. He saw not just the vast sums of money, but the implicit message from his father. She was worthy, she was valued, she was the one who had truly understood him, even as he, Marcus, had been busy counting his perceived blessings. Kelsey, the overlooked, the invisible, now held the ultimate trump card, not just financially, but emotionally. I don't believe it, Marcus muttered, his voice barely a whisper, defeat finally settling over him. Clarissa, who had arrived later and sat silently observing, her face pale, now looked at Kelsey with a mixture of awe and fear. The dynamics of their family, fixed for decades, had just been irrevocably shattered. Kelsey finally spoke, her voice soft but clear, cutting through the shattered remnants of Marcus's pride. It wasn't about the money, Marcus. It was about his intention, about what he truly valued. She picked up one of the letters again, its creases familiar now, and held it gently. He saw me. He acknowledged what he couldn't say in life. She wasn't gloating, there was no triumph in her tone, only a profound, quiet understanding. The validation she felt transcended wealth. It was the inheritance of a father's true love, a love that had been hidden, silent, but ultimately enduring. She knew then that her value was not determined by a will, or by her brother's acceptance, but by the quiet knowing in her own heart, affirmed by her father's final, heartfelt confession. The wealth itself was a bonus, a means to an end, offering her a freedom she had never dared to dream of, a liberation from the silent judgments and stifling expectations that had bound her for so long. She stood taller, not from arrogance, but from a deep, unshakable sense of her own innate worth, finally recognized, finally celebrated. The silence in the room now held not despair, but the dawning possibility of a profoundly altered future. In the days that followed, the revelation of Arthur Brant's true will rippled through the Brant family like a shockwave. Marcus, stripped of his perceived infallibility, retreated into a sullen silence, the weight of his father's secret testament crushing his once unshakable confidence. Clarissa, ever pragmatic, adjusted her demeanor, her once dismissive glances at Kelsey, now tinged with a forced deference. But for Kelsey, the inheritance was not a weapon, nor a means for revenge. It was a catalyst. The true gift wasn't the fortune itself, but the validation that came with it. Her father's letters, reread countless times, became a blueprint for understanding, not just him, but herself. He had seen her quiet strength, her unwavering compassion, her unseen sacrifices, qualities he had valued above the very empire he had publicly built. This recognition, long overdue, liberated her. She felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in years, a freedom to finally be herself, unburdened by the need for external approval. The money became a tool, not an end. She decided to use a portion of it to establish a foundation in her father's name, dedicated to supporting young women pursuing non-traditional careers, those often overlooked or underestimated in male-dominated fields. It was a subtle, poignant tribute to her father's belated recognition of her own path, and a way to empower others to avoid the very struggles she had endured. The Brant countryside home, now hers through a separate, private agreement with Marcus, became her sanctuary, a place where she could finally breathe freely. She oversaw its restoration herself, not as a monument to past hurts, but as a living testament to healing and new beginnings. She invited Marcus and Clarissa for a visit, not to gloat, but to extend an olive branch, to offer a possibility of genuine connection beyond the dictates of wealth and status. Marcus, though still visibly humbled, came. The forced smile was gone, replaced by a tentative, almost vulnerable expression. He saw the genuine peace in Kelsey's eyes, the quiet authority she now carried, an authority that had nothing to do with money, and everything to do with self-worth. It was not a grand reconciliation, but a quiet, tentative step towards understanding. Kelsey's journey had come full circle. From the overlooked daughter, shrouded in the shadows of expectation and dismissal, she had emerged into the full light of her own truth. Her father, in his final act of wisdom, had not simply left her money. He had bequeathed her the profound realization of her own inherent value, a gift far more precious than any material wealth. She realized that true inheritance isn't always what's written in a will, but what's revealed in the quiet, unspoken language of the heart, a legacy that patiently waits to be discovered, patiently waits to set you free. Her life, once defined by what she lacked, was now abundant with what she truly possessed, herself, wholly and unequivocally. So, what about you? Have you ever felt that flicker of unseen potential within yourself, a quiet knowing that you are capable of far more than the world sees, than perhaps even you allow yourself to believe? Kelsey Brandt's story is a powerful reminder that true worth is often a hidden gem, not easily visible to the casual eye, and certainly not always recognized by those who claim to know us best. It resides not in titles or bank accounts, but in the unwavering strength of character, the quiet acts of kindness, and the resilient spirit that endures despite every dismissal. Her father, a man of profound secrets, ultimately understood that the greatest legacy he could leave his daughter was not a public declaration of wealth, but a private, undeniable affirmation of her value. He saw beyond the surface, beyond the expectations of society, to the very essence of who she was. His hidden inheritance was not just financial, it was an inheritance of self-worth, a powerful testament to the fact that sometimes the greatest love is spoken in the quietest ways, and the most profound truths are found in the most unexpected places. Remember, your value is not dictated by someone else's perception or by their lack of attention. It is inherent. It is built in the sacrifices you make, the compassion you extend, and the silent battles you win every single day. Just like Kelsey, you may possess an extraordinary talent, a deep well of empathy, or a quiet resilience that goes unnoticed by the bustling world around you. But that does not diminish its power, its significance, or its potential to change not only your own life, but the lives of those you touch. So, share this story. Comment below with a time you felt truly seen, or when you discovered a hidden strength within yourself. And above all, remind yourself, and those you care about, that true worth is never forgotten, never lost, and always, always waiting to be discovered. Perhaps in the most unexpected corners of your own extraordinary life. Embrace your hidden potential, for it is the most valuable inheritance you will ever possess.